compression, 1176 clones, LA2A clones, bus compressors, dynamic EQs, multiband compressors, effects such as reverb, delay, chorus, flange, phase. You've got saturation, distortion, clipping, limiting, pitch correction. Stop buying plugins. It's all available in Reaper for free. I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, No Limits.com. Let's take a look at some of my favorites. Let's start off with ReaComp, Reaper's stock compressor. And as you can see, it doesn't have a very pretty interface, but we'll get into pretty interfaces later. It is a utility player. You can use it for anything. I'm not afraid to use it on a mix bus if I need to. It has your typical compressor controls, such as threshold here, and the input metering comes up alongside of the threshold control. We have a gain reduction meter, an output meter. We have a wet-dry signal, which we can combine for parallel processing. There are typical attack, release, and ratio controls. We also have a look-ahead, a pre-comp, auto-release if we want to, a knee size control, low-pass filter, high-pass filter, different kinds of detector inputs. We can sidechain this as well, limit the output, and auto-make up the gain as we want. In addition, there are lots of nice presets here. I have it set as a compressor on this drum reverb right now. Just tightening up that verb a little bit. If you're looking for an 1176 style compressor, well, Reaper has you covered. We have a couple here. One is the NC76 from Tukan, and if you've worked with an 1176, you will be familiar with these controls. This one has a set detector circuit, and we push into it with the input gain, adjust our output accordingly. Attack and release, which are oriented the opposite way as a typical compressor. This is from Tukan Studios, and John Matthews, he makes a ton of great plugins. We also have an 1175, which I sometimes use, cleverly named. It is modeled on the 1176, as well, but the interface is quite a bit simpler. So ratio, gain, attack, release, mix percentage, and our gain reduction meter here. So if you need an 1176 style compressor, you have two options. If you're looking for an LA2A style compressor, here is the JS LA2CAN, cleverly named again, from John Matthews and Tukan. If you're familiar with an LA2A compressor, you'll recognize these controls, and we have the peak reduction, which we can control here. Internal or side chain, a bypass switch, the usual stuff. Here it is on the vocal bus.
No, I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road and feel the wind up on my face, my mind. Instead of living this old life, instead of living this life.
We can use this any place. We can use it as a bus compressor. It's a nice glue compressor. It's a little bit slower than an 1176 style compressor. Commonly used in vocal chains after an 1176. Can be used on bass, on lots of different stuff. I like this bus compressor from Tukan quite a bit. It has all the features you would normally see in a bus compressor. Threshold, ratio, output, high pass, attack and release, which both have auto settings if you like. You can run it in stereo, dual mode, or mid-side. And of course, we can sidechain it. I'll show it to you here on my master bus. It has input meters over here on the left and output meters on the right. Here it is. I'm just barely moving the meters on this, but it does color the sound in a way that I like on my master bus. If we just go to our effects browser and type in bus, you'll see we have several options in the JS category. Here's Bus Comp 2, which I've used on a couple of things in this mix. It has a side chain with a high pass filter on it as well. And you can also side chain it, run it in mid-side mode dual or stereo. We also have some bus, and we can change to different style emulations here. And we have Vari-Bus. Now Vari-Bus is super interesting. And let's go back to the vocal bus and I'll show you. Vari-Bus has a very nice distortion in it, I believe. So when you push up this input gain, you can really get this nice warm distortion happening.
A little more each day, getting closer to the finish line.
You hear that distortion?
No, I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road and feel the wind up on my face, my.
Not exactly appropriate for these vocals, but I do have this Vari-Bus compressor on my vocal thickening chain, which is down here. The effects, I have this chain set up, and it's all Reaper plugins. I have a dynamic EQ, we'll get into that a little bit later. A channel time delayer to give a little spread. I've got the left side at 20 milliseconds, the right side at 30 milliseconds. I have pitch set up in repitch, left side at -6 cents and the right side at +6 cents. A little bit of pitch shift there. I have JS Ripple Phaser by Garrett Luck, who is another prominent name in this list. And then the Vari-Bus compressor giving it a little bit of dirt. So let's take a listen to that real quick.
A little more each day, getting closer to the finish line. No, I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road.
So that dirties things up nicely. I like that Vari-Bus compressor. Reaper's stock EQ is called ReEQ. I have it on this vocal harmony. And you can see it is a very functional EQ here. It's set up with 5 bands, but I can delete those or add more. It's got shelves, high pass, low pass, peak EQs, all kinds of different EQs. We can adjust the frequency, the gain, and the bandwidth. I can create a new band just by double clicking, move it up or down here in the display, or with the controls down here. Set it just the way that I want it. It's a very functional EQ, works great. I use it a lot. Another EQ is ReaQ, ReEQ, and this has an interface you might recognize. Once again, you can double click on the line to create a band, set it for peak, notch, band pass, some different kinds of low cuts, some high cuts, a Pultec low shelf, or of course a peak EQ, and I can push it up or down here or control it here with these controls. Now, one of the extra features that ReaQ has is that you can set it for mid-side mode. For instance, I could cut the lows on the sides. If I wanted to do that, change this to a low shelf maybe. Cut the lows on the sides. It also has a limit function. It's not a dynamic EQ per se, but it does have a limit function. Let's type add here and type EQ and see what else we have. EQT Tukan is a Pultec style EQ, and I have never used it. But I just saw a video on it today, and it has all the typical Pultec controls that you would expect. You can take it at 30 Hertz and both boost and attenuate, and you'll get the little Pultec low-end boost that you know and love. So there's 3 nice EQs in Reaper, sound perfectly good, and do the job for you. What about dynamic EQ? Well, Tukan has us covered again. Let's look at the green dynamic EQ. Now this has 5 bands, a low shelf, a high shelf, 3 bands in the middle, a high pass filter down here. Now it can be used just like an EQ, so I can take a frequency, change the frequency with this knob, turn it up or down, change the bandwidth. I can control that here as well, just as an EQ. But if I want to use the dynamic part of it, I click on the D, and I can set the threshold by dragging this back and forth. The sensitivity is essentially like a ratio, and the range is the maximum amount of cut or boost. So you can use this as a de-esser or any other use that you would have for a typical dynamic EQ. Click anywhere outside to get back to the EQ section, and you can see each of these 5 bands has a dynamics section in it, and you can solo up the bands individually as well. What about multiband compression? Well, we have a couple of different choices. One is ReaXComp. Let's search for ReaX. And you can see we have several bands here. We have 4 bands, but we can add or subtract bands if we want. Go back and forth between the various bands. Each has a range. We can control the threshold and the range by dragging up here, or again with the sliders down below. We have a knee, attack, release, and so on, an output gain for the individual band and an output gain for the entire compressor. We can auto makeup gain or choose to listen to the gain and do it ourselves. It works just like any other multiband compressor. But it's a little hard for me to see. It's a little small. So if we're looking at where these kick in, the numbers are a little small for me to read, so I prefer to use something else. I use Tukan's Multiband Processor. And it's set up with 5 bands, although we can go down to as low as 1. I don't know why you would use 1. But it's set up for 5 bands. I have it on this mix that I am doing right now. You can select your frequencies by clicking on this little circle and dragging things around. You have a threshold, ratio, attack, release. Here is your gain reduction meter right here. We can change it to compressing just the mid or the side, or anywhere in between with this knob, and we have an output gain as well. You can turn off these sections. It has an envelope shaper in this center, which is unusual for a multiband compressor. Here it is on this mix. This multiband compressor also features the option to change from 12 dB per octave slope to 24 dB per octave slope, and a couple of different modes for the filter. The fur mode adds latency but is more accurate and sounds better to my ears. But if you're using it live, select the IIR mode, which can be used live because it has no latency. How about limiters and clippers? Well, we've got those as well. Right here I'm using ReaLimit, which I really love this interface and I love the way it works. I have it set up for high quality. You can just see it so easily. This is true peak, and I have a brick wall ceiling at -0.7 because this is on my mastering chain. And you can easily see what it's doing. So here you can see I'm just shaving off the peaks just by less than a dB. Super transparent to my ears, super easy to see what's going on. So I use this as the last thing in my mastering chain. Lots of other clippers and limiters in Reaper. I like to use the JS Event Horizon clipper. The metering is not great, but it does have a soft clip function. So if I want to soft clip, I can bring this fader in. If I don't want a soft clip, I can just bring it all the way down to 0. So you can read on the meter over here. And so you see it's peaking out about -5. So I have the threshold set for -7. I have a ceiling for -1 and a soft clip of 2 dB. So somewhere around -9, it's going to come in and start clipping a little bit all the way up to -7, and then it's going to stop the signal there. And then on the output, we're going to come up to -1. So we should see this output clipped off at -1 here. And that's what we see. Let's see what else we have. Now I'm using a different clipper on my snare master, and this is the JS hard clipper. The idea was the snare was the loudest thing in the mix, and I liked the impact. I wanted to pull it back a little bit, control the dynamic range, but I still wanted it to be just as forward and to sound as loud, even though it wasn't as loud. And a hard clipper might be a tool for that. Let's take a look. Now look at that, we're cutting 5 dB off gain reduction here. We're only making up 1 dB of gain, so we're cutting 4 dB off the top of that snare, and yet it sounds just about as loud as it did before. So that's the job of this JS hard clipper. We've got JS master limiter, which I haven't used. We have JS soft clipper limiter, and a couple of Tukan limiters. Let's take a look at Tukan number 2. This one has a nice interface. Easy to see what you're doing. Let's see Tukan limiter number 3. I like this interface as well. Plenty of choices here. So what do we have in terms of delays? I like to use the JS delay with tempo ping-pong a lot. Now what this delay does is you can set a tempo sync fraction of a whole note, and then it will give you a ping-pong between the left and the right, which you can set the width a little bit, set the dry down and the wet up, of course. Mix a little feedback in, and you're ready to go.
I just smile and say, I'll be there in no time.
Gives you a nice little ping pong back and forth. I've got some other effects added to that.
I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road and feed.
Another delay that I like is the Tukan delay machine. So this is interesting. It's got delay 1 and delay 2, which you can pan left and right. You can sync them up to the beat and have different divisions selected, and then change the feedback so that they match about as long as each other. As a high-pass filter or a low-pass filter, you can drive it a little bit and make it sound ugly, put on a tape emulation or crush, and we of course have pan and output and a mix control. So you can come up with all kinds of delay combinations and change them to your heart's content. And it's got a great visual representation to help you see what it's going to sound like before you listen to it.
I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road.
I think we probably need a little less feedback on both of those.
I'm not gonna stay.
Let's do some triplets here. And let's do 8 notes straight on the other side.
I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road and feel the wind upon my face, my mind. Instead of living this old life, I just smile and say, I'll be there in no time. A little more each day, getting closer to the finish line.
Anyway, that's just a brief example of what you can do with the Tukan delay machine 2. We also have a lot of other options for delay. If I just type in delay, you can see all these JS delays. There's a lo-fi one, there is delay with chorus, the one I like to use, delay with tempo ping-pong, and so on. What about reverb? Well, I like to use a plugin called ReVerb. Let's take a look. Basically, one way it works is to load IRs. So I have a wet-dry control. I have my vocal synth over here, and I have it picking up a file. There are a lot of good IRs, reverb IRs that are out there for free on the internet. I downloaded a bunch of them. When I want to load one up, I just try. We can browse and listen to different reverbs here. So you can see you can easily call up reverbs there. Let's put it back to where it was. And I've just got ReEQ after that to EQ out some of the lows and the highs. Let's look at another reverb. Once again, Tukan has us covered. Maybe you recognize this unit if you've been in the studio business for a long time.
A little more each day, getting closer to the finish line. No, I'm not gonna stay, gonna hit the road. On my face, my mind, instead of living this old life.
They both sound pretty good. That's what I like to use for reverbs. How about flange, phase, chorus? Let's take a look. I've used the Ozzifier Chorus a few times. Let's just listen to what it sounds like here on the Music Master. And you can control the number of voices and the pitch spread and the time spread, the wet and the dry mix, and how far it is panned out, of course. There's a new entree into the world of effects like this. It's called Blacklight Modulation, again from Tukan. Between tremolo, pan, filter, phaser, flanger, and chorus, you have pretty much any kind of this type of effect that you want. And of course, most of these controls have depth in them and mix, and some of the other controls vary depending on what the item is. This one has frequency, depth, feedback, and so on. The chorus, depth, delay, high-pass filter, and mix. So I've been using this one a lot lately. We also have Garant Luffs. I haven't tried this vibrato or the warble pitch shifter, but I have used ripple phase a time or two. Nice phase effect right there from Garant Luff, another top developer of these JSFX. The fastest way to get better at your home recordings is to have a mentor. I have a program, the Home Recording Mentorship program. There's a link below the video. Check it out. What about metering plugins? Well, Reaper has you covered as well. Let's look up here in my Master Effects, and I have 3 metering plugins right here. Loudness Meter, which shows our peaks here to the left, and some various LUFS statistics, including LUFS integrated, which is useful if you're mixing something to a particular LUFS target. And a loudness range as well here. I find this meter to be extremely useful. I do like to use the dynamic range meter to give myself this center area. It shows some average levels on the outside, peak levels on the inside, and then this dynamic range on the inside. So you can compare that to the dynamic range in your reference mixes. Then we have a Goniometer from Tukan, and this shows us width of the mix And phase down here at the bottom, we want to see this phase meter mostly on the right-hand side, and we can compare the mix to the width of our reference mixes. This has a speed control as well as a scale so that you can move it into a range where it makes sense for you. One other plugin I would like to add is we've got the Spectrum Analyzer, Saike Spectral Analyzer, the beta one. Now with this we can look at the frequency content of the whole mix. I like to set it at 3 dB per octave and slow it down to somewhere over 1,000 milliseconds for the integrate and smooth it out to 80, 85. We can actually set it up to run many different tracks, including your reference mixes, up into this analyzer and compare them to your mix as well, which is super useful in both the mixing and mastering phases. So these are the 4 main meters that I use. Reaper-specific meters, loudness meter, dynamic range meter, Goniometer, and the spectral analyzer. What about distortion, fuzz, saturation, exciters, tape emulations, and the like? Let's see what's available. For distortion, sometimes I like this Waveshaping Distortion. It's super interesting. Listen to it on the whole mix. You start here at breaking up a little bit there at about 11 or 12%. But if I crank it much beyond 20, you're going to really hear it. I really like the way it sounds in small amounts, however. Let's search for fuzz, and we have this JS Distortion, fuzz. Super ugly. I have used this to good effect on bass guitar before. We have tape recorder from Tukan, and this is an interesting one. We have a denoiser, which we can use, and I like to use. We can set the tape for 30 inches per second or 15 inches per second. If I recall correctly from my tape days, 15 inches per second has a more solid low end but a higher noise floor than 30 IPS. We have a drive control and a tape control. One of the things that happens with these Tukan plugins is that they act very analog. So if we hit them hard, they are going to break up like that. So let's put a volume control before this and pull this down so that we can get a good level coming to this tape emulator. So this also is good in small amounts. What about saturation? JS saturation is good in small amounts as well. How about exciters? We have JS Exciter and JS Exciter Treble Enhancer. And here we can set the frequency and then control the mix and the drive. You can add that to individual instruments or across an entire mix. As far as exciters go, I have an exciter on my room microphone right here. And you can see it is the Tukan exciter with fat bottom. I've got the sub bypass and I'm just using the exciter here. And this works differently than I thought it did. This control is set at negative 11.3, and if I push it up here, it goes to 0. And then anything north of 0 is this direction. So I assumed that 0 would be the same as bypassed, but it is not. Let's take a listen. So off is the same as bypassed, and anything to this side of off adds excitement based on this frequency here. So we're at around 3-4K. We can change this frequency if we like. So you can hear it adds some nice sizzly high end there. Now for the sub, let's go to the bass master. So I have the exciter bypassed here and I have the sub. Let's bypass that as well. You can select the frequency here, and again, anything above off adds some boost. Listen to the low end. It's got some nice stuff right there. Now we have another exciter plus sub from Tukan, and it is set up very similarly. You select the frequency here, you have a mix percentage here, bypass switch, and this fat bottom indicator tells you whether the rockin' world is going round or not, obviously. Let's talk about a couple of miscellaneous plugins that I like to use. One is Garant Luft's Spectrum Matcher, it's called. And with this plugin, you can run a sound into it and learn its frequency profile and then add that profile to another sound. I used this to EQ my vocals. I pulled out an isolated Freddie Mercury vocal, ran this process on it, and then it told me what I needed to change and created the curve for me to change my vocal to the same or similar frequency content to Freddie Mercury's. And then I had to pull it down a bit because it didn't sound exactly right at 100%. So that's what you can do. You can change this to a negative amount as well. So if you want to do something like track spacer, where you're cutting the frequencies present in one instrument out of another, you can set this up to learn the frequency content, put it on another instrument, and pull that down to a negative amount so that there is space for those instruments to breathe. Another plugin I like to use is Bass Professor. So Bass Professor gives you some EQ control over the bass, as well as adds a little bit of dirt and whatever this Profess knob does, but I'll show you what that sounds like. This is Bass Professor Mark II. I think that adds quite a bit to it. I have a fuzz on this bass as well over here, added in, and then a straight DI sound. And I think the dirt control for this, plus the fuzz, allows this bass guitar to cut through the mix on mid-range speakers that don't have great low end. ReaTune is a tuning plugin. It's quite easy to use. Let's add ReaTune, R-E-A-T, and throw it at the front of the signal chain. Let's go to correction. This algorithm is fine. I'll probably change this down to about 50 milliseconds. We'll go to manual correction, track pitch, and update. Now I can see anywhere in this song, I don't sing through this entire song. There we go. And if I wanted to correct the pitch on this note, let's expand it out a little bit. This note, for instance, I would just click, left click, and draw across.
Note time.
It's very transparent. It's possible I've just saved you a bunch of time that you'd spend combing through all of these Reaper effects. There are hundreds of them. If so, give the channel a like and a subscribe. It helps keep me going. The fastest way to get better at your home recordings is to have a mentor. I have a program, the Home Recording Mentorship Program. There's a link below the video. Check it out. So those are my favorite Reaper native plugins. If you think I missed some good ones, let me know in the comments. For now, I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, No Limits.com. See you soon. Bye-bye.